Hello. Okay, so in the most recent video, when I was going over elements of the five themes of geography, I went over the first three elements that I had listed on the board: location, place, and region. I totally left off formal region. I told y'all there were three ways to look at regions, and I talked to you about two of them, and I said, okay, there's the three ways, and finished the video. So, anyway, I realize now that I did not talk to you about that third way, and so we're going to begin this video by doing that. Okay, so there are three ways that we look at regions. We talked about functional regions and perceptual regions in the previous lesson, but the third way, and usually the one that people talk about first, is a formal region. So, especially in Western culture, in industrialized culture, in the globalized world and globalization that's taking place in the world today, formal regions are particularly important. They are often described as geopolitical areas. Okay, so a geopolitical border is the lines on the map that distinguish what the area of Arkansas is. In comparison to its bordering states like Louisiana and Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi, etc. Right? So, those are geopolitical borders. Someone got together and drew those lines on the map. Okay. Sometimes the lines that are distinguishing for a formal region, for a geopolitical border, sometimes that might come from a particular physical geography features of a place. So, for instance, if you can see in your mental maps in your mind the space or the shape of the bottom of Texas and New Mexico at the bottom of a map of the USA, the particular shape of the bottom of those states that runs across the North American continent follows the path of the Rio Grande River. So, Rio means the Rio Grande, I should say Rio Grande, because Rio means river, so you don't need Rio Grande River, just Rio Grande, okay? So that's the Grande River. So that's where the bottom of Texas gets its shape. And so people who drew those those geopolitical boundaries used that particular physical feature to identify that boundary of this nation compared to this nation. Across the top of Canada, through treaties, so the political part, the geopolitical part here, is through a series of treaties and agreements among different powers. That's where the particular border of the formal region that distinguishes the USA and Canada, how that came to be, because there's no particular physical geography feature for why the line is right there in Montana, all the way across, through Idaho and Washington State and all that. So there's no particular geographic feature, physical geography feature that would say that there's the border between Canada and the USA. So it's a political agreement that this is where the boundaries are. And so maps change sometimes, certainly when there are disputes, geopolitical disputes about borders. Sometimes the settlement is we're going to reorganize these borders and now we need to publish new maps because the border used to be here and now the border's here. Or we're going to break this region off and make a new formal country out of it, or principality or something. And so this is why formal regions are important. I've also got an example of trade zones. So, for instance, we used to have something called the North American Free Trade Agreement. And so this was North America, of course, is a continent, and it's a continent that we can see on a map. And the trade agreement sort of erased somewhat those geopolitical borders that separated the countries in North America, and at least in terms of trade and economic exchange, it changed the idea of those distinguished state, one country compared to the next, and so it allowed the flow of goods and currency and even people to a certain extent in regard to trade and commerce for that particular formal region. So, I left it off the former video. Is not an official part of your notes, but I left it off the formal video, pardon me, and include it please, in the description of region, along with functional region and perceptual regions that we did cover thoroughly in that previous video. Okay, so this video was going to only cover human environmental interaction or interplay and movement, so let's go on to those now. All right, so human beings affect our landscape when we come to it, when we move to it, conquer it, whatever word you want to call it. Whenever we set up a culture, we set up a place to live, we modify the physical environment to fit our needs. So whether we are harvesting animals or hunting and gathering plants, or whether we are cutting trees down to build houses, or using mud and clay from the earth to build bricks to build houses, are we putting a dam on a river so that we can have a lake that will be a water supply to a certain area? How are humans interacting with the environment to modify it for our use? Or for whatever, maybe it's not our use, maybe we want to designate a wildlife zone because this is important for human culture in general, and so we want to protect the wildlife or the flora and the fauna in a particular area. And so we designate a perceptual region or a formal region in order to protect this particular species or all of the species that exist in that particular area. So certainly humans put a footprint on the physical environment whenever we establish ourselves and live in a particular area. However, the environment kicks right back at us. I just recently watched a Ken Burns documentary on the Dust Bowl in the United States. It was about 100 years ago, and it corresponded directly with the Great Depression, and the climate simply did not participate. It did not go along with the ideas that human beings had for the environment, particularly in a perceptual region in the USA known as the breadbasket. And it was originally a place where prairies and grasslands were naturally in the environment. Human beings moved in. We changed those grasslands to farm fields. We took out the grass, we tilled up the soil, and it really changed the way the microclimate over that particular region in the USA happened. And we had a particularly hot summer, a series of summers, droughts, and people who thought they were going to be farmers and thought they were going to feed themselves and support themselves with selling surplus had to travel anywhere they could to find work instead. If you have read The Grapes of Wrath or any of the other works of fiction surrounding this point in our history, you have a really good idea of the kind of life that humans had to endure because the environment kicked back at us when we decided to go a certain route with our human culture that didn't necessarily work out because there was too many obstacles, too many natural obstacles that came into our way, physical geography obstacles. So, human-environment interaction examines the way in which human beings modify the places. So when we talked about a place, we said, are there human characteristics of a place? Well, that means that we had a particular effect on the landscape there. And so if a city is in a particular spot and we can describe what kind of skyscrapers they have or what kind of attractions are there that human beings had a hand in creating, that's the human footprint, the human effect on the environment there. When we talk about in meteorology an urban heat island, this is a phenomenon that you can notice in the heat statistics, that there is a significant increase in how hot it feels, the heat index and how hot it is registering on temperature gauges in an urban environment compared to in a rural environment. And so you can see this give and take in a lot of different aspects of or the interplay with a lot of different places around the world of how the human footprint and the environmental kickback, how the interplay takes place. Okay, so human environmental interaction, and our last one is movement. Movement is one of a very, very nuanced and important. All of the themes of geography are important, but movement is particularly found every single place because movement has to do with so many different aspects of life all throughout history and today. Today, especially with some of the changes that are happening with the way currency exchanges occur or cyber, the connectivity that we have almost instantaneously from one place to the next with messaging. So movement can refer to people going from place to place, ideas going from place to place. Diffusion is a key word in your textbook regarding this kind of movement, a cultural trait that goes from one location where perhaps the cultural hearth originated, such as there's an argument about where did hip hop originate? Is it inner city New York and Brooklyn or the Bronx Zoo, for instance? Or is it LA? And there was even like a fight back in the day between the East Coast and the West Coast idea. But now you find hip hop as a movement and an artistic style all over the world. It has diffused from the cultural hearth to other places. This is an idea. This is a concept. This is people and behavioral traits that go along with this form of culture. And so movement can be of goods and services. Is something manufactured in India, and does it end up in the dollar store down the street from you? Look at the labels on those products that we buy, because those will tell us how far away this thing was when it originated, and now it's in our hand in Arkansas, USA. So movement is the last of the themes of geography that we needed to cover for this particular week. Please make sure that you read your textbook that gives you some additional examples and not a different perspective really, but a different point of view and more examples to include in your notes. And I will see you next week for more geography when we look at the topics from chapter 2. Very interesting developments with population and things like that for next week that we're going to look at. Text me with questions, write your reaction paper. Bye.